expert on global climate change, but I wrote this recent book titled Mega Threats, 10 Dangerous Trends that imperil our future and how to resolve them. And actually chapter 10 is about the inhabitable planet, and I discussed the question of climate change. But I think that to understand climate change, we have also to think about other both economic and non-economic risks that are facing each other, because all these risks are interconnected with each other. It's a 10 by 10 matrix in which each one of these threats affects the other, vice versa. And some of them are central to climate change. And I would argue that the nature of risk have changed in the last few years. And I'll give you a few examples. A few years ago, even 2 or 3 years ago, we worried about lowflation or deflation. Inflation was too low. Today we have to worry about rising inflation, and some of it has to do with energy. Food is of course related to climate change. A few years ago we were worried about secular stagnation, lack of aggregate demand, while the worry today is about stagflation, the combination of inflation and recession. This coming from negative aggregate supply shocks. And some of those aggregate supply shocks have to do with climate change. A few years ago we were worried that interest rates were too low, zero, negative, and so on. And now we have to worry about interest rates rising, and given the amounts of private and public debts, those debt ratios becoming unsustainable. Household, corporates, financial institutions, entire country and government going bankrupt. So the reality is right now we don't have very good option. But I think the key question is the following one. There's a lot of good work, and everybody here is involved in it, in trying to stop climate change. Why it's not occurring? We have to think not only about what's desirable, but why what's desirable is not happening. What are the political constraints domestically and internationally that prevent us from doing the right thing? And I think there are several of them, and you have to be all of them aware of it, because if you're not aware of it, there's a wishful thinking about what we should do as opposed to what is likely to be able to be done. Constraint number one. In many countries, a good chunk of the population doesn't believe in climate change or in human-driven climate change. I live in the US where when the Republicans are in power, nothing gets done. That's unfortunate, but that's one reality. Problem number two, there's a conflict between young and old. You know, old people are not going to be around the next 20, 30 years. A person born today has a life expectancy, he or she, of 100 years. They will suffer of the consequences. Unfortunately, the young don't vote, the elderly vote. And we discount the future, hoping that maybe some miracle technology is going to resolve. And individually, for each of us, to reduce our carbon footprint implies sacrifices. I tried to be vegan because a quart of all emissions due to livestock agriculture. After 3 months, I failed. I became carnivarian. You know, everybody should insulate their homes, having solar panels. Even the young are not willing to make those sacrifices. So unless you want to do it, there'll be a problem with this intergenerational conflict. Globally, you have a risk, you have a free rider problem. If a country does all the effort to reduce their emission to zero, there's lots of costs, and nobody else does it, they don't get any benefits, emissions are global, and they pay the cost. And coordinating on 200 countries to do the right thing is hard, if not impossible. Problem number four, there's a conflict between rich and poor countries. We're telling India and China, other emerging markets, you should cut their emission to zero in the next 20 years the way we want to do it in Europe and the United States. And by the way, even the US and Europe, we're not going to do it, or not fast enough. And they tell us, wait, you created this problem, 200 years of industrialization, 90% of the entire cumulative historical stock of emission comes from you guys, so you're telling us remain poor today, because you have created this problem. Yes, the new flow of emission is coming from China and the emerging markets, but we're going to increase our emission for the next 20 years until we become middle class or rich. Then we're going to think about cutting it down to zero. But of course, that's going to be too late, unless you subsidize us. And the amount of subsidy required or transfer to convince this poor country to do the right thing today is about $1 trillion a year. This Congress just passed $4 billion of those subsidies. It's a joke. The idea we're going to do a $1 trillion transfer is mission impossible. Final problem. In a world of geopolitical conflicts, US and China don't agree on how to deal with pandemic. They don't agree on global security. They don't agree on free trade. They don't agree on to deal with financial and economic stability. Of course, they don't agree even on climate change. So cooperation in the world of geopolitical conflict becomes harder and harder. Final observation. My former colleague at Yale, Bill Nordhaus, who won the Nobel Prize for Economics for his work on the environment, said that if we want to reach the Paris target of 1.5 centigrade above industrial, the average carbon tax in the world should be $200 per ton. Today that average is $2 per ton. Less than that in US, meaningfully higher in Europe, but even in Europe, we speak about 10 or so. Now, let me ask you the following question. Which government is willing to raise carbon taxes from $2 to 200, a factor 100 times, okay? In order to achieve those targets, I would say almost no one. If anything, the opposite is happening. Because fuel prices are high, everybody's cutting the fuel taxes, the carbon taxes, making the problem worse rather than better. So my final point is, I think that climate change is the biggest threat probably in the long term to humanity. It could literally destroy the planet, our humanity, our economic system. The numbers will be huge, but the constraints, political, domestic, international, to do the right thing are serious. The technological constraints today with current technology to achieve growth with net zero are there. Hopefully there are technology going to get us in a better trade-off in due time, the more we invest into it. But the time to act on it is now, because if we not do anything, we're already on the way not to 1.5 or 2, but even if everything that was agreed in Glasgow, in Sharm el-Sheikh, were to be achieved, and it's not going to be achieved because there's lots of promises, lots of greenwashing, there's lots of greenwishing. Even if that were to have achieved, we're going to a world of 2.4 plus, probably 3. So that's not enough, and if we wait longer, it's going to be a disaster. But we have to stop the greenwashing, we have to stop the greenwishing, we have to stop the greenflation, we have to stop ESG that is often just talk and no action. And every firm, every bank says have a net zero plan is written by their PR or communication department of the business, and we have to change the world now, otherwise it's going to be too late to save this world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm very glad that Johan didn't come in one way because it's a very tough act to follow, but also it means that I have to press you a bit more and explain what we need to do to stay within the goals of the Paris Agreement. So we heard we need to get to net zero, and we'll try and do that around 2050. We're not on track, but if we do that, we have to get to a period of net negative thereafter. That means we have to build a world where we have to pull more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere than we emit into it. And for this, we're running out of time and we're running out of space. So we already need 3 planets worth of current tree coverage to solve the problem. And that's where we come in. So at Climeworks, we've developed direct agriculture with the world's leading company, and we can downsize the 3 planets to about the 20% of the area of Iceland, or a very large city like Sao Paulo. And what we do is we build machines that filter CO2 out of the atmosphere, and then we turn it into stone. You know, we're not a startup anymore, we're a scale up. We raised almost $1 billion, and we have 16 plants in the field. We're currently building one that has 36,000 ton capacity. That's tiny, and we need to do a lot more. Because the nature of the problem is that carbon dioxide removal is something you need for your company, for your life, to get to net zero, right? You can't get to zero, there are always unavoidable emissions, and for that, you have us.
Waste is generated every year, and 90% of it ends up in landfill. Figures which will be doubling by 2030. We realized this almost 3 years ago when my sister and I were running our own fashion brand, a sustainable fashion brand in Spain. And as soon as we did, we came to this extremely painful realization That is, every garment we made, regardless of how sustainable it was destined to be to end up in a landfill. So this realization not only applied to us, but also to Zara, to Mango, to Nike, to any other textile producer in the textile industry.
I would say I'm extremely pessimistic in the short term and extremely optimistic in the long term. I think we have the technical solutions. I've been in the wind industry for many years, and wind and solar and batteries and EVs will solve the problem, but it's 20 years before we really get to scale. Fusion, Commonwealth Fusion Systems, is going to make it happen, but it's 2030, 2040. We don't have enough time. I think the scientists at the beginning said it, said it to some level, but I do want to make a very important point here. 10,000 years ago, the Earth's climate stabilized and humans settled. Those settlements led to civilization and the economy that we have today. The climate is no longer stable. People talk about 1.5 and 2 degrees C. These are political goals, not scientific goals. We are going to blow by 1.5 this decade and probably 2 degrees next decade. So why isn't this everything at Web right now? We're talking about the economy, the civilization, and the old economy. Most of the economy is an old economy built on the old climate. We need to invest in the new economy for the changing climate, and we need to get back to climate stability as fast as possible. And the companies that we saw today are just some of the companies out there. We saw companies in batteries, in wind, in fashion, a whole host of different industries. We need the entire economy to be rebuilt, and that's a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity for investors in the crowd.